Hi, I'm Luke Williams, founder and editor of the XR Beat. Today I'm joined by Rob Theriault, EdTech leader in XR, recently retired Immersive Technology Manager at the Georgian College, and author of The Future of Education is Experiential. So for readers who don't know your work, Rob, could you give us the quick version of your background across paramedic training, education, and immersive technology?
Sure. For most of my adult working life, I had two parallel careers. I was a paramedic and an educator. And after introducing virtual reality into our paramedic program, I was approached by our senior leadership team to ask if I would lead virtual mixed and augmented reality at our multiple campuses to help faculty explore and integrate these technologies into curricula.
Great. And obviously, being a paramedic, it's a very high stakes job. Would you say that your background doing that work sort of changed the way that you judge VR as a training tool, and perhaps almost gave you, a higher bar for the technology to clear?
Most definitely. I've always been really interested in how students learn and seeking out technologies that might enhance student learning. And for virtual reality in particular, as Jeremy Bailenson from Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab would say, it's important to look for use cases of virtual reality that would otherwise in the analog world be dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive. So with our paramedic program, I started with mass casualty incident triage training, something that we did on an annual basis, but took months to prepare a mock disaster and to find a space to do a mock disaster, find students who are willing to volunteer as casualties, put makeup on them so they look like they were injured, reach out to police, fire, and paramedic dispatch centers to let them know a mock disaster was going on campus. But in virtual reality, we could do this very easily, and not only could we do it easily, but we could put students through mass casualty incidents, starting with small casualty incidents to larger casualty incidents, and scaffold their learning in such a way to not only build muscle memory around triaging in a mass casualty incident situation, but also scaffolding in a way to build stress resilience.
When did VR
Yeah.
stop feeling like an interesting demo and start feeling like something that could genuinely improve training?
For me personally, it really hit me around 2017 when I attended a paramedic educator conference in Washington, D.C., and I got to try virtual reality for the first time. And when I did that, in VR, I encountered a patient who was struggling to breathe, and I could see him struggling to breathe. I could see his chest heaving. I could see the discoloration in his lips from the lack of oxygen. I could take a stethoscope and listen to his chest, and I could speak to him, and he would respond with 5 or 6 word sentences, which just further sort of indicated to me that he was really struggling to breathe. And when I came out of that experience, I knew immediately that this was a medium that was completely different from any other educational technology I had ever seen or experienced before, in that it was immersive, it was experiential, it made me feel the same kind of twinge of adrenaline that I would get as a paramedic when I encounter someone who was sick. I recognized that he was struggling to breathe. I felt this urge to reassure him to begin treatments so that he wouldn't deteriorate. And I immediately thought of my first year paramedic students. And when we do case studies, I would bring up a set of slides to describe someone who's struggling to breathe. And of course, students have no context. So when you put them in an immersive environment where they can see someone who's actually sick, it's far more powerful, far more impactful than describing it to them.
Where does VR or mixed reality actually improve learning rather than just giving those benefits that I just mentioned?
Yeah. It depends on the subject area, and it varies for every subject area. So, for example, some experiences require full immersion, require virtual reality, where the scene or the space that you're in is contextual, and that context is very powerful for learning. So, for example, students are learning a new language. If we one of the first pilots that I did when I became an Immersive Technology Manager was with our Indigenous Languages Studies program, and their first semester course was called Language in the Home, and so we put students and their teacher into a virtual house, and students would have conversations in the kitchen and the backyard and out in the driveway, and they would be able to pick up things in the kitchen, pick up pots and pans and foods and things like that. And when you put them in a contextual environment like that, and give them agency, the ability to speak, the ability to touch and manipulate things, that embodied cognition is very strong for remembering the language and conversing in the language. And the evidence is pretty clear on how powerful embodied cognition is, or experiential learning is, for students. So giving them context, giving them a sense of presence, giving them agency is very powerful, whether it's Indigenous language studies or power engineering or architecture or almost any discipline.
It's fascinating. Do you ever encounter resistance? Obviously, not everybody is a technology enthusiast.
I've encountered some resistance. More so, I've encountered skepticism. People not, teachers not understanding the technology and having a perception that this is a game. We have Canada's largest maritime bridge navigation simulator, and it's this massive deck with wraparound video, and students come from all over the world to learn how to steer cruise ships and tanker ships into port, to complete the capstone project in their ship piloting program. But not everyone could come to Canada for this program, so we started sending headsets and computers out to companies to train them remotely in virtual reality, similar ship deck, all the same functions. And before we did this, I met with 3 ship captains who taught at the campus, and the lead instructor was quite skeptical about the whole process. And so I said, well, put the headset on. You're going to meet another ship captain in there, and you can have a conversation with him. And 10 minutes into the experience, I knew from his facial expression and from the reaction, the words that came from his mouth, that he was really quite impressed with this experience, because in VR, he could, for example, pick up a pair of binoculars and see the kayaker 500 meters away and steer the ship accordingly. He could interpret the radar. He could steer the ship, move the ship, slow the ship, do all the things that you would normally do. And for him, it felt truly real. And when he came out of the headset, he said, Rob, I had no idea it was going to be like this. This was incredible. I don't know what I was thinking it was going to be before, but after experiencing it myself, I am completely sold.
Are there any particular, tech vendors that you kept coming back to time and again, and you think are making real strides in the EdTech space?
There's a program called Ovation for Public Speaking that I really love, where you can speak in front of a boardroom of 12 people, or a classroom of 25, or a conference of 150 people. And a few things that are great about this program, and there are some other public speaking programs as well that are quite good, is that it evaluates you on your rate of speech, on how often you look back at your slide deck, on how many fillers it uses when you're speaking. And the audience is full of Gen AI avatars. So if they're engaged, they're sitting on the edge of their seat. But if they're maybe not the edge of their seat, but if they're disengaged, they're stretching their legs out, they're crossing their arms, they're looking at their virtual phone, and they're listening to everything that you're saying. So at the end of your speech, they're asking you questions, intelligent questions, and they're pushing back on some of your arguments. And so it enables students to go back and build a more cogent argument and try again. And the analytics provides you with a score. And so you can do it again and get a better score, and do it again and get an even better score. So one of the affordances of virtual mixed and augmented reality is the ability to practice things at a frequency that would otherwise be impossible in a college or university setting, or a high school setting, for that matter. And the analytics are very powerful for students to be able to improve. When you're able to do things in an appropriate sequence, you're far more likely to retain that, to develop that muscle memory, even if the tactile fidelity is not there. So take, for example, in nursing or in medicine, where you're learning how to assess a patient in a certain sequence and how to elicit a history of their medical history, medications and allergies, and you're learning to initiate treatments. You're doing all those things with your hands, and that embodied cognition is very powerful for retaining that information.
Fascinating. Let me ask you a question that might require you to kind of put a different hat on now. So, thinking commercially, um, y- let's think about an enterprise or even, a university or training team, but
Mhm.
basically an institution that's considering an XR and an AI solution. What should they ask themselves before, signing on the dotted line and actually buying something?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One, is there a challenge, for example, in their existing training program? So I recently spoke with a company in the nuclear industry, and they train new tradespeople at the nuclear plant on a pretty regular basis. And one of the training elements, there are many. One of them is a walk down procedure, which is where you walk down the nuclear plant and you have to look at things to see if everything is in proper order, everything's working properly. Are there any trip hazards or any other sorts of hazards? And identify them and take the appropriate actions with them, either correct them immediately or notify your supervisor. And that's difficult to do because you've got new staff who would have to physically go into the nuclear plant and do this walk down, which might be, a kilometer, 2 kilometers of walking through the plant, and you have to develop your situational awareness to be able to identify these things. And the ultimate goal is to reduce injury, reduce costs, and you can replicate that in virtual reality. So if you recreate the nuclear plant in virtual reality and you use eye tracking technology, you can train people to identify hazards to improve their situational awareness. And with eye tracking technology, you can actually track whether they looked in the right places or not. You might ask a candidate, for example, did you happen to look over to the right when you passed that hallway and notice such and such? And the the participant might say, sure, I noticed, but the eye tracking technology will tell you, no, you didn't even look in that direction. So using those kinds of biometrics and creating digital twins of sites and having them go through the process at a frequency that would be impossible or at least impractical in the real world is very powerful.
Fascinating that, Rob. Thank you for your insight on that. I have a bonus last question for you. What do you think that the EdTech market will look like with regards to XR technologies in, say, 12 months' time?
Colleges and universities are exploring and adapting XR and AI at a pace that is significantly faster than what I saw in the year 2020. And I believe they're going to continue to find efficiencies with XR and AI that currently don't exist in the educational system. But more importantly, generative AI has completely undermined how we assess students from a assignment and essay perspective. And things like smart glasses and AI and video enabled earbuds, pendants, watches, contact lenses are going to undermine the exam process. And so I think we are going to have to move from a marks based system to a competency based system at the intersection of XR and AI, where students, when they enroll in college or universities, are issued an AI mentor that knows their subjects, that knows their learning outcomes, and will do the heavy lifting for the students at the content level, at the knowledge comprehension application level. And teachers will focus more on things like case-based learning, problem-based learning, critical thinking, interpersonal skills, interprofessional skills. I think that transformation is inevitable, and I'm starting to see it now in some educational institutions.